Anywhere you go, give it on. Anywhere you say. First, we have Kate Singley. Kate, she has an interesting bio. She delights in the paradoxes of life as a homesteader and sex educator. She's a grief walker and ecstatic dancer. She designs systems and is an improviser, a mystic, and a pragmatist. She looks to the cosmos for archetypal alignment and sees the mythological in the mundane. I love all of that. Kate brings her devotion to guiding others in accessing the divine through the pleasures of the body and connection to the natural world. She is honored to support the mysterious process of growth and transformation through one-on-one sessions and group classes, and as a facilitator of rites of passage ceremony. So I'm looking forward to hearing Kate's message today. In addition, Jake Whedon will be joining her to talk about earth-based wisdom and sacred sexuality. Jake is a somatic counselor and runs learning development and curriculum for the School of Consciousness Medicine, where earth-based wisdom and expanded states of consciousness are woven with somatic psychotherapy and holistic coaching skills. He splits time between San Francisco, Bay Area, and his hometown of Alpine, Utah. Jake's work includes a body-centered method of guided self-discovery called Hakomi. If I said that wrong, you'll fix it. Oh, Hakomi, Steve is saying, as well as embodied movement, dance, archetypal psychology, mindfulness, body work, sound, and ritual. So we're glad to have you guys here, and I'm just going to let you take it right over. I think you guys have the ability to share screens and to handle everything. We'll clear off in all the questions that were asked earlier, so that Q&A will be clean for you. And I'm around. If you guys have any questions or issues, just speak up and I can jump right back on.
All right.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so with that introduction, I don't know if we need to introduce ourselves as much as we thought, but I'm Jake Whedon. I as Sarah mentioned, grew up in Alpine, Utah, and now live in the Bay Area and do work with people in expanded states of consciousness, induced through all those methods that Sarah talked about: dance, movement, Hakomi, and work a lot with folks in the ex-Mormon and post-Mormon community to do healing work. And I think that's good for me.
Cool. Something I didn't include in my bio is my relationship to the Mormon community, which is relevant to what brings me here now. I grew up in Salt Lake City and actually left the church at age 17, exploring all manner of expanding my horizons and internally and externally. Moved to California at that age and began experimenting and exploring all the dimensions I could get my hands on and my body into. And so connection with the natural world and eventually deeper relationship to my erotic life has been just foundational to my path of awakening and growth into my whole adult self. So it's been 20 years now that I've been exploring these things, and coming back to this community, however of a community or communities you consider yourselves, is pretty new, very, very new, and pretty edgy for me to kind of return to my origins. So I'm really honored to do so. And I just want to acknowledge that I come to y'all not totally knowing where you're at with these topics. And so I hope that we're bringing stuff today that's going to meet you right where you are, that it can either spark brand new possibilities or kind of affirm and help encourage and affirm you on what you're already discovering inside of yourself. Because I really do feel like, what we're bringing is universal and available to everyone. So excited to to meet you where you are and to share what we can from where we are.
Great. And I will say too, that it's really odd to be talking to upwards of 100 people that we can't see or hear or anything. It feels kind of like we're having our own conversation also into the void out there. So hopefully everything lands and we won't know if it does or not.
But please do chime in on the chat and the Q&A. Since there's two of us, we can toggle our attention pretty well.
Yeah, any feedback or anything there helps us.
Questions also, hopefully we can address.
Yeah. So where I wanted to start out was just with kind of the preface that, for me, personally, I think the most harmful scripture in all of the Mormon canon is the one that says that the natural man is an enemy to God. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd quite get this emotional this quickly, but here we go. I just knowing, like being a kid and learning what that scripture meant, just instantly puts us all at odds with our body and at odds with so much of ourselves. And so much of the healing work that I've been doing since leaving the church has been in reuniting and coming back into those parts that we've all had to shut down and push out and exile of ourselves. And to me, that has been just so foundational to my healing, that reconnecting and that coming back into relationship with these parts that I shoved away and that I pushed out. And I'm just really how beautiful that being in these different states of consciousness are, for the way they allow us to connect to those parts, the way they allow us to hold them and bring them back in. And welcome them and apologize to them and just come back into connection and to receive all of that and to have to feel all of that pain and all of that grief, but also all of the power and all of the joy and all of the connectedness that comes with being more of our whole selves. And so, these states of consciousness that we're talking about are such a portal to that. And I'm really excited to, be talking to a group of people that use mushrooms in particular as a sacrament, because the school that I work with borrows a lot of its wisdom around earth-based practices from the Mazatec people, who are essentially the custodians of healing work with mushrooms over the last few, I'm not sure if it's hundreds or thousands of years exactly. I'm still kind of a novice in learning about them and their ways. But I just want to acknowledge the great debt that we owe to the Mazatecs for preserving this practice and preserving this sacrament that they've been using as a sacrament for a very, very long time. And that now folks like the Divine Assembly have access to that now, in part because of the way that the Mazatecs held it and guarded it for so long. And so it's also really interesting to get to talk to you about them a little bit and about their ways of seeing the world. And very much with the caveat that I'm not Mazatec. I was born in Provo. And that I can never really understand the world from a Mazatec perspective, but I can talk a little bit about some of the elements of what I've learned about them that have helped me and how they've helped me. And the biggest one is really around the connection to the natural world and this earth-based wisdom, this wisdom that comes from the earth, literally in some cases. And and how so much of the way that I've learned about them seeing the world is that they consider themselves in relationship with everything. They're in relationship with the mountain behind their house, and they're in relationship with the stream that runs through the village, and they're in relationship with the lake and these places. They're in relationship with the animals. And it's not just that we're connected to them, it's that we are a part of them. That there's really no boundary necessarily or limit between humanity and nature. That humanity is nature. And that requires us to be in reciprocal relationships with all of those elements of the natural world, that there is a giving and a receiving. When they go up and they, perform a ceremony in a cave, they leave behind offerings of cacao and corn and things. And there's always a giving with the receiving. And that's so different from, our Eurocentric culture of taking. We go and we take over and we conquer and we colonize and we mine and we strip. And it's this very different relationship of giving and receiving that I find when I learn that principle and I live it in regard to the earth, I also start to live it in regard to other humans. And I find that my relationships in the world become more reciprocal and more balanced. And there becomes this real balance of giving and receiving. And, even for me, sometimes receiving is a hard one. As Mormons, we were taught to be, high yield, low investment members of the church, right? Wow. Like to give and give and give and not need anything for ourselves. And how much I have really benefited from learning how to receive and learning how to receive from the earth, going out and touching the earth and, meeting with the creek behind my house and just really feeling into those connections and feeling into the way that the earth wants to hold us has been so big for me. And I think that that reconnecting that happens with the earth and the reconnecting that happens with my own body and with my sexuality and with all of those parts is so integrated. Another little piece of wisdom around the Divine Assembly's sacrament is that in nature, what fungi do is connect things and break down blockages to that connection. They take what blocks connection and they make it into food and into life again. And I see them doing that for us across kind of a psychosocial substrate instead of a forest floor substrate, where they're bringing us into connection with ourselves, with each other, with the parts of us that we've lost or pushed away, and with the earth. And then just going in and saying, oh, there's a block. There's a cognitive block that you have to that. Let's just compost that. Let's just break that down. And so, yeah, to me, that has been so integral to connecting to sexuality and connecting to which, sexuality isn't the only piece, but it's such a big one for us as Mormons that we have been taught to suppress and hold down and put away. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a little bit of the introduction for you, kind of the framing of, talking more deeply about sacred sexuality itself and how it relates to our connection to the natural world. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Does anyone else need to just take a breath with all of that? I wanted to pause you earlier with the depth of emotional presence of that piece of what a personal violence that scripture was. And I just want to make room for that as you're listening, to really let this be a personal experience. If what we're speaking to is relevant to you, if you relate to it, let yourself feel it. We're part of this composting and breaking down those barriers, like Jake is talking about, is moving us so much more into our bodies. And I think that's really the invitation that these medicines and these practices are bringing us to, is to come out of our heads, open up the pathway to actually drop in and feel more of our body, of our body's connection to the earth, and all of those elements and beings and aspects of the natural world that we are a part of. So that includes some discomfort, and it includes the grief and the tenderness. And I can say a lot more about that, but just want to invite that here now, because we're not going to transform by talking about how we transform. And as the last speakers spoke to so beautifully, the integration is how it's, it's the everyday of how these things incorporate. I actually love that word. Corporeal is the body. Like, how do we bring it into the body? And we're talking about our physical human bodies and the body of the earth, and how, how this right here, this conference, this day is just such an invitation to bring those ceremonies that you've had, those deep journeys and revelations, into waking consciousness, into felt sense, into relationship with each other. So just really want to welcome your full felt presence, your sensations. Does what is spoken of here get your heart racing, or get your stomach nodding, or get your butthole clenching, or bring like some soft opening, like, thank God someone is talking about a thing that I've held so tightly, or with shame, just let your whole being be present and receive and move with what's alive as you hear all this. And then, so to start with that premise of the enemy to the natural world, and the separation from, and the, colonialist mentality, as Jake said, the takers, which, yes, someone commented, does that word particularly credited to Daniel Quinn, Ishmael, but also the concept is not novel or isolated to any one thinker. It's colonialism and capitalism, and it's very deeply rooted in monotheistic cosmologies of the separation from and the hierarchy of, and especially, just the concept of dominion over the earth, right? That I remember learning early on and feeling like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Can I interject something here?
Yeah.
I think there's something so interesting about, Mormon theology coming out at a time of colonization,
right?
That it's so embedded because it was part of the cultural world that we live in,
right?
And especially that was 1820s frontier America,
right?
This idea of going out and conquering the vast unknown, and that even Mormon exaltation is this concept that we're going to go populate worlds. It's colonialism on a cosmic scale at that point, that it's so built in, this idea of we're going to bring this great stuff to the world, the void, and make it all new. And that really that's not what this is about.
Right. So taking stepping back into these plant-based, earth-based, and embodied-based medicines or practices, and indigenous wisdoms, there's an invitation again to humble ourselves and to come into that relationship with, like Jake is saying, which I want to be really careful that, the pendulum here could easily swing into the guilt and the shame of like, oh, well, I don't want to be that. I'm going to renounce all of that. I'm going to be vegan. I'm not going to cause any harm. I'm going to, or live in the, I guess guilt can be, has been, especially in religious organizations has been so motivating, has held such a strong force of impression and can be motivating. But it's really, I want to invite that the natural world is always welcoming and inviting and embracing of all of us. And so one of my teachers, a man, Martin Prechtel in New Mexico, who served as a medicine man in the Tzutihul Mayan community in Guatemala, near Lake Atitlan. So he comes from that lineage, as well as where he grew up in the San Domingo Pueblo reservations in New Mexico. His wisdom that comes, through that lifetime journeys really invites us to be in beautiful, that reciprocity is like acknowledging that we are indebted to the natural world. We're in this relationship not to get out of it, not to absolve ourselves, but to be humble and beautiful in that relationship, in recognizing like we receive everything we need, like bow down to that. We receive everything we need, more than everything we need from the natural world. And the natural world isn't holding that back from us. There isn't actually a like parental, punishing, punitive, all those P words, but like that's a frame that we were given that we might want to question, and that these medicines and these wisdom ways actually invite us to challenge and actually flip on their heads, that actually, what if we see the earth even not as Mother Earth, but as Lover Earth, right? What if we were in these relationships in a reciprocal way of like, how do I take care of you because you take care of me? And just like Jake said, it begins to bleed into all of our relationships. And we haven't gotten to the sexy stuff yet, but you can maybe use your imagination there to imagine how much it directly translates when we start to not feel like I'm at risk of being an oppressor or a perpetrator, but I can actually open and receive all that's being granted to me generously. And where does that generosity then naturally want to flow from me?
Yeah. It makes me recall an experience I had I was able to induce an expanded state through dance. I was out in the woods, and I just had this really strong sense of wanting to just like put my hands on the ground and almost like massage the earth, like give her like a massage. Like I remember taking off my shoes and just wanting to like even step carefully through the woods, and just give her sweetness that was there. I am seeing that we have some questions in the chat. I'm thinking maybe I'm thinking some of these we can maybe pause till the end and grab at the end. Is that okay?
I haven't looked at any of them yet,
maybe
so
I'll let people. I'll tell people that we're gonna get there. So don't worry that we're not seeing your questions, and we'll save some time at the end to get them.
Perfect.
So where do you want to go from here?
Well, I just hear the primary song in my head, so I want to name it.
Which one?
Because I have been given much, I too must give.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think that's one that, like I said, I've been out of the church for 20 years. So when these things pop in, I'm like, that's still there and it's relevant. I like it.
Right.
I've taken some of the good pieces with me. And actually, maybe it's a nice segue. I just also hear that concept of the body as a temple. And that's something that I haven't ever let go of, but I think I've maybe retranslated it into recognizing like that my body, and this gets more toward sacred sexuality and the nature of Eros, is that my body is like, I am the one who has authority here. This is my sovereign, sacred space. And
your temple,
my temple, for my dedication, for my devotions, for my pleasure and my receiving and giving. That I think, just that is, it's like so simple, but it's enormous. And it's actually the foundation of everything that I work with. When I work with individuals recovering from trauma, or even just cultural programming about what we think sex is or is supposed to be or look like. Usually it's about what it looks like rather than what it feels like, is I make that reinvitation of establishing our safety and sanctity in our own bodies. And that being the foundation. And again, like Jake is speaking, like, what is it to actually stand or walk delicately barefoot on the forest floor, to feel that as the foundation of this sacred space within myself, and what I'm choosing to relate to and let impact me, right? Because we feel everything that we're engaging with, whether consciously or not. Our body is sensitive and taking things in and registering them as, the story of the world that we live in, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so, yeah, the more and more we take agency with that, the more we can create then the relationships with discernment and the engagement in an erotic encounter, in a sexual situation where it's your choice is what comes first. And there really are just so many layers of releasing from, the powers and systems that we've been brought up in, that have it be otherwise. It's actually a really radical thing. Even, a lot of the work that I do is around masturbation education. Go figure, coming up Mormon, where masturbation was, I don't need to get started, like, as you know, is not permitted. For me, finding masturbation at an early age was actually how I soothed myself in grief that was also unacceptable in my household, right? Grief, anger, rage, discomfort, like uncomfortable emotions, even experiencing them, let alone expressing them, there wasn't room for that. So it's a radical and powerful thing to reclaim that. And then, in my case, and the invitation is always there for you to also reclaim the pleasure, to reclaim the access to what is enjoyable, what is joyful, what is arousing, what is erotic, and deeply connective to that, more unified source of life. I don't need to go all the way down that road yet.
No, it's really wonderful. It brings a lot of things to mind, and I don't want to get, too sidetracked, but just that idea.
It's all a very circuitous, spirally track.
Yeah. And the body point. As a temple, in Mormonism, because I was so steeped in it till only a few years ago, we talked about the body as a temple because the temple actually belongs to God, and it's just kind of on loan to us right now. And so it's not ours to do what we want with. And so this concept of body as temple, as my altar of devotion to my own God as self, as God, as everything is such a radical shift, even with similar languaging.
Yeah.
And there's just so much there around really making pleasure a devotional activity, like giving pleasure as a sacrifice to the god of Eros, an
offering,
not even a sacrifice, an offering. I'm not giving up anything. I'm receiving, and so, you talked about masturbation. And for me, that was such a challenging thing growing up in the church, being in addiction recovery 12-step programs in the church, because I masturbated every 2 or 3 months, which the only problem with that is it wasn't frequent enough, and that is such a hard thing that we all were taught to just cut off and to just put away and to not allow to be a part of our life. And it's really, it's really challenging, and it's so delicious. Sexuality is one of those parts I talked about that I feel like I'm just welcoming back in.
Right.
And I'm just saying, oh, I'm sorry that I ever made you leave.
Mm-hmm.
Like, welcome. You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're here.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to have sexuality now feel like a thing that is constructive and is generative and creative, rather than something to be afraid of. It's destruction, and it's how it's going to hurt people and hurt me, and all that stuff. And it's not some beast to be tamed.
Yeah.
It's a beast. It's a beast, but not to be tamed.
To be befriended.
Yeah. And not one to be, put in a box like we were taught.
Yeah. Yeah. We could go off on that.
We could. I also want to let you get to other
befriend
parts that you want to talk about.
I'm also just glancing through the questions and whatnot.
Do we want to say anything to those, or?
Well, I'm seeing this one piece that I can kind of riff off of, as far as this definition of what is a non-sexual experience with psychedelics versus actually including sex. And I guess I just want to back us up or slow us down and broaden the horizon of what is sex, or not even getting to sex and sexual, but what is erotic and what is our sexuality. Because I think we came up with this concept, this class to be, or this talk to be, incorporating these two, the natural world and our erotic nature, because they really are all they're just so woven, to put it simply. When I think about, again, Mormonism coming into being in a very colonialist framework of the world, there is this like linear, formulaic system of like, you do this thing and then you do this thing, and you eventually get to this place, and you have this supposed success. And actually the same thing is taught to us with climbing the corporate ladder, with like our versions of success. I think I had some, with the consumption enslavement that we're actually all mind washed into thinking will provide us happiness. We'll land someplace when we finally have enough of the right clothing or the second house, or, there's this like trajectory that is supposed to. And so just to put it more literally in sexual terms, people think of the sexual formula of like an escalation of a relationship into physical intimacy that begins with mouths, and then under the clothes, and then the genitals, and then the orgasm, often even only the male orgasm, that is a fulfilling sexual experience, and tie a bow on it, we're done. It's not working. Like, it's not working, people. There's like that line misses all that's out here and underneath. And so as we reconnect to our root of our body and our deeper connection and the wisdom of the intuition and presence in the moment, the curiosity and playfulness that is actually very childlike, that is very naturally elicited by being in the natural world. Like, you just look out the window for 5 minutes, and if you bring on that mindset, the curiosity and childlike mind, like, you'll have a dozen questions about what is going on, what does that feel like, and what happens if I go over here, and what is under there. And the same thing is true in sex. So just flipping that from that like linear, this is how that system goes, and that's what success and happiness is, like, that's not working for most of us. I know it didn't work for me. So, and even outside of strict religious programming, it's still what most people go by because that's the default, until we're given more creativity and more options. And so just want to invite that, like, the natural world, the erotic world, true presence in the erotic is circuitous and spiraling and oroboric and upside down and inside out. And it's messy, and it's not meant to be this tidy, clean, ordered thing. Like, we are inviting the wild. It's very much the wild. And again, from, wisdoms of indigenous peoples who knew to be breeding as they were starting to work with horses and livestock, they would still breed their domesticated animals with the wild ones on a regular basis. Like, that knowing that we can't just go this clean cut, funneled route to anything that would be close to health. Like, that's just not going to last. We need the wild, and just what a difference it makes to bring that into the personal, into like, oh, what if it's not actually gonna work for me for it to look a certain way? But what if we actually turned up the volume on how it feels? And yeah, if the whole concept of performance, right? Sexual performance, like it's supposed to, something is expected of us. And we actually just, even in the moment, like in a sexual moment, like, oh, this isn't going the way it's supposed to go. She's not turned on. She's in her head and distracted by the to-do list, or he's getting soft and like penetration can't happen. Like, all right, well, what is here? Oh, my heart is aching. Oh, what if you tell me a little bit about that? Like, oh, actually something is happening in my gut that like actually needs attention before we can move forward. That's intimacy. Being with what is right in front of me, instead of, any idea of anything else, honestly, being present to the vulnerability of this is what's true right now.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that like, even, and this has been a bit of my work since leaving the church, is we can leave the church and leave those scripts behind. And then I felt like I left and came out and tried to find what the new script was.
Right.
Like, oh, what do regular people do for their sexual script, and what is that like?
Right.
And really being able to come back away from that and peel apart that and say like, no, there is no script. I got into a conversation where I mentioned the consensus in the conversation ended up being that we dislike the word foreplay because it implies that all of these other things in the erotic landscape are just in service to that one thing, and how silly that is, and that we don't need to have that goal. And this expansion of what is the erotic and what is the playful and what is the natural and wild, incorporating that into our lives in a meaningful way, does really expand our sexuality, but just expands our aliveness. Right. Like sexuality as vitality, sexuality as aliveness. Yeah. And how that expansion of eroticism is so key to that, so I can feel erotic if I touch the bark of a tree. Yeah. Playing music with people, dancing, and, anything embodied. What brings you pleasure? So I'm thinking about, again, to come back to like, how does sex fit into these experiences? Like, well, what is alive? What is enlivening? What brings you into that passionate enjoyment, engagement in the level of like how you might have categorized like, oh, that's only for sex. How are you actually experiencing that to some degree in a lot of different places in your life, or in those expanded states that you can, invite more of that. And to circle back and sanctify it, right? We titled this Sacred Sexuality, almost as a needling at the issue of how is it not sacred? Really, like that whole concept. I think you might want to talk about this, that whole concept of the mundane. Right. I mean, the whole idea of making some things sacred means we're making other things mundane.
Yeah.
And that differentiation is kind of silly. And being in these sort of expanded states helps us get past these dual definitions into places where we see everything as everything, right?
Yes.
Because the mundane,
Yes.
the word mundane means of the world, mundo, like it's of the earth. And that stuff is the sacred stuff.
Yes.
And, and so there is this place where we can get where everything is sacred, which also means nothing is, and it's also playful and fun and silly sometimes. But there's this place where you can get where you drop those definitions and you drop those labels, and you come into just experience, and riding the waves of pain and pleasure and all of that together is what aliveness is.
Right.
And how much these little boxes that we've put ourselves in over time are really things we do to protect ourselves sometimes, but also things we do that separate us from from real life, from the real visceral experience of both the mundane and the sacred, and those interwoven.
It has me turn to you all and just consider, I want to acknowledge how courageous it is that each one of you are here and willing to stretch into out of those systems, those programs, those formulas that you've been given. Just want to honor and acknowledge you for that, because if that isn't happening, at least from yourself to yourself every day, it needs to be, because it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And to step out of that script and to not know, and to be willing to meet the uncomfortable. And I warn my clients about this all the time. It's like taking that lid off, inviting the mysteries of the unknown and expanding what's possible with sex, or even just the aliveness at all. Like it means you're opening to all directions. You can't just have more pleasure without also encountering more of what's been in the way of experiencing that pleasure. So just honoring you all for being here, for stepping boldly onto this very mysterious path that is your authentic aliveness. Yeah. We could drop into a little experiential.
I think so. We've got about 15 minutes. If we do that for 10 and answer questions for 5, does that feel okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just on that thread of inviting you each to fully be here in what's being offered, I want to make a little time to experience that a little more deeply in your bodies. And so if it feels comfortable to you, I'll guide. You're welcome to follow along as much as feels available to you, and, throw it out the window if not. But take good care of yourself first. Again, I just always want to emphasize you are the authority of your body. And so if it's comfortable to you, you can relax your gaze, soften into a peripheral, unfocused gaze, or close your eyes. And just allow a couple of breaths to bring your attention more inward to your body, your being, in all the ways that you perceive yourself to exist in this moment, in this place and time. And as we've been speaking, you've been listening and feeling. I want to just invite some moments to kind of integrate and to listen a little more deeply to what's alive in you here. And to bring a more focused awareness inside, if it's comfortable to you, you could bring a hand to your heart, a hand to your lower belly, or even a hand to your genitals or your pelvis, your hips. Maybe even just notice if anything comes up for you in hearing me say that, invite that. This invitation to really presence your sex in your body. Your body on this earth. And I want to welcome the possibility of your belonging that begins within you, really fully occupying the space that you're in. It might help to kind of scan and imagine your body here in this space. Just feel into yourself from head to toe, left to right, and front to back. Welcome. Welcome all that is here. If there are experiences through this time that have brought up fear or judgment, resistance of any kind, welcome. There's a lot of really wise reasons to be protected from these topics. Just welcome those with compassion and curiosity. Like, what do you need in order to feel safe in your body on this earth? Maybe you've also felt excitement and expansion and possibility, desire, maybe even arousal. Welcome. Or longing. All of it, welcome. And if there is a spark of something that you desire, that you feel a new possibility in what's been evoked here, I just want to give a moment to really acknowledge that, to blow a couple full deep breaths on that ember, to feed that flame of what you know is possible for yourself. What it might be like to live in deeper connection, deeper presence. And more fully expressed receiving and giving in all your relationships. More pleasure in your body. More approval for what's true inside of you. And if there's something, a spark of something that you might be recognizing needs more tending, to acknowledge that too, and give some breaths to how you will tend to that, how you might come back to that later. And always keeping your self-care in the forefront as it feels right, and you're this grounded, rooted, self-oriented place, you can come back to the room, come back to this collective, this community that is circling together to feed greater possibility, to receive these sacraments, to expand and connect. Seeing some really beautiful comments.
Mm-hmm.
Really grateful for all of you being here and on this exploration with us. Yeah. A painful metamorphosis, beautifully alive and liberating. That's such a beautiful way to put it. I think the attendees can't see this comment, but someone is naming the journey away from the indoctrination of what my sexuality was permitted to be and into who I really am, and that I am the captain of my life, and my sexuality has been both painfully metamorphic and beautifully alive and liberating. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
Poetically, beautifully.
Yeah,
it's
thank
true.
you.
It's
thank you, Blake.
not without pain that transformation happens.
Yeah. I was going to just pop into the questions that they gave real quick and see if we can answer a couple.
Yeah.
Heather writes, I'd love to learn about what Hakomi is when you're ready. That's a long, we both have training. The simple
nugget is it's mindfulness for somatic psychotherapy. So it's a toolbox, a really awesome, sharp toolbox for how to be in and guide others into states of mindfulness, to bring awareness to our somatic experience and how we've come to have the beliefs and thereby the behaviors and the patterns in our lives that we're experiencing. And we kind of unravel it down to that root level of, well, what is the body? How did this get rooted into the body? And how do we transform it at that level from a deep state of mindfulness? It's, and it's like people sometimes compare it to or question how it's related to hypnotherapy, but it's less directive. Like hypnotherapy is like, we're going to get in there and push you in a certain direction or make it happen a certain way. Hakomi really leans on the trust that there is an organic, natural unfolding, an intelligence in each one of us that knows how to take us to our wholeness. And we allow that to unfold.
Yeah. And I've done a couple interviews with the Mormons on Mushrooms podcast. And so there's an episode from maybe 2 months ago where I talk about it for, I think, about a half hour on the show. So there's also a little more there that if people want to dig in, they can go there. Amy writes, I'm a sex therapist and very much appreciate you sharing how this enhances your sexual experiences, how it connects you to yourself and others in the earth. So lovely. So much repression. Yes.
Yeah.
And she says,
that one I sort of addressed.
Yeah, that one you did address. And I'll just say, in terms of people having sexual experiences in expanded states of consciousness, I find that sometimes sexuality just emerges organically and sometimes it doesn't. And so rather, I would just recommend that if you're going to be intentionally inducing expanded states, to be open to it, but not trying for it, not having that, what you were saying, that directive, goal-oriented bit, but to really just be able to be with what emerges. So some of my best work around helping me get at parts of my sexuality weren't very sexual. I wasn't orgasming or aroused. It was connecting with parts of myself in this kind of somatic and psychological way that did end up changing my sex life. But did have a huge effect on my sex life.
Because it can be amazing how those those exiled parts of us can actually hijack our sexuality and take things in the wrong in a direction that isn't actually serving our lives and our desires.
Yeah. So that, yeah. And it can, one of my most probably opening in terms of my sexuality types of experiences in an expanded state had to do with like my hips just shaking for about 2 hours, and that was just what had to happen. And then whatever that was, it unblocked some important things later. So there's just not being so attached to like having to have a sexual experience in the state to be able to heal sexuality is, I think, an important piece.
And there's, a whole another hour or, long course. There's so much more content to actually speak to what it is to bring or invite sexuality explicitly into those altered states. Just those slide deck touches on it so briefly, but there's a lot to be said about creating a safe set and setting and the container and consent agreements with anyone who's there with you in that space. Especially because of the propensity for re-traumatization in that opened state. So just want to put that forward with a lot of care around the power and the vulnerability of sexuality in those open states.
Yeah.
And, trust yourself, but also like those cautions are true of, go slow, less is more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and
or talk to people who have more experience with it or professionals. I think either of us would be happy to advise or support.
Totally. And just that, I, consider sex as a means of inducing expanded states of consciousness too.
Absolutely.
And so, there is a lot of sexual healing to be had in the expanded state of consciousness that is sexual activity. Yeah. So there's, you don't necessarily need to mix in these other modes of inducing expanded states, but there are places where those overlaps can be beneficial.
Yeah.
I think there's one last question here, and it's almost more of a personal one. Ingrid, I know who you are, Ingrid. That's really wonderful. And I'd love to share some more about my experience with you. That episode I mentioned on the Mormons on Mushrooms podcast gets into it a little more. And also I'll be in Alpine in a few weeks. And if you want to meet up there, I'd love to say hi. So thank you. I think that's pretty much our time. Anything you want to close with before we...
Good. I think I did with just bowing deeply to all of you for being on this path. I'm honored to be here with you.
Great. Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Kate and Jake. That really was a powerful hour. So I really appreciate the message and I hope everybody who is attending today, as they're on their path of healing after leaving Mormonism. And for some, it wasn't as traumatizing as it was for some of us. So, we're all in a different place, but this was an interesting way to look at it and think about it. So thank you for being open and sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.